The reporter on the Bosasa scandal. Now, several ministers have been named, not only the former ANC MP Vincent Smith, involved in that scandal, allegedly accepting a whole lot of equipment, electric fences, CCTV equipment, things like that. We'll be hooking up with Carl, but I believe, Sakina, that those unions are online for you now. Let's see if that's possible to continue with that interview. Back to Sakina. All right, we can't seem to get the unions back up. We will be going to Carl. We'll get him up on Skype, but let's see if we can take a quick break. All right, I believe we have Carl Cowan. So let me give you the background again. ANC MPs and high-profile ministers implicated in that scandal were very quiet today. The SABC reached out for comment to Vincent Smith, the ANC MP, and Ministers Nomvula Mokonyane, to no avail. The City Press has published an expose claiming that Smith, who sits on and even chairs several parliamentary committees, was paid at least 670,000 rand by the controversial Facilities Management Group over 3 years. It's claimed that Ministers Gwede, Mantashe and Nomvula Mokonyane received high-end cameras, alarm systems and electric fencing. All right, let's chat to City Press journalist on Skype, Carl Cowan. Carl, have you also been trying to get some response from these ministers named?
Yes, indeed we have, and I've also been hitting a brick wall a little bit today. I've tried to get in touch with the ANC as well to ask them if there's anything happening from their side. We've also reached out to the presidency to say, look, well, 2 cabinet ministers now, their personal residences are being sort of upgraded by this private company who provides services to the states, and is that something that the presidency takes note of? And I've just heard nothing back.
All right, the fact is the books speak for themselves. If Bosasa provided the goods and that can be proved, tell us how much proof you have, then the ministers, regardless of whether they were loans or not, there's a lot that they're meant to declare, correct?
Correct. Yeah, and what we're saying is that none of these things were really declared. And for me, that's not the main angle of the story just yet. I mean, the main angle of the story really is now is we're trying to paint the picture of what the level of influence and sort of how the far-reaching influence that this company has. And it's not a very well-known company from Krugersdorp, but they seemingly have been swimming in tenders since at least 2003 with various government departments. And there where they have contract work with government, there is always questions surrounding certain relationships that they have with certain ministers or government officials.
Paint the picture. The fact is they were doing a lot of favours for well-connected people and then receiving a lot of government business. And these claims about Bosasa, at least, aren't entirely new, are they, Carl?
No, it's not entirely new. Vociferous newsreaders will remember way back from about 2008. There was a series of exposés published in the Mail and Guardian and also in the City Press later on about Bosasa and about an SIU investigation that was put into some tenders that they got from the Department of Correctional Services. Now, this report was actually handed over to the MPA for prosecution, but nothing's really happened in like almost 10 years. It's nearly been a decade now, and nothing's really happened. It's sort of just stalled and died off. And, you know, we haven't been able to find any evidence of a direct link that these CCTV cameras were installed because we want this minister to do this for us. The problem really arises out of this untoward relationship that this company seemingly has. If you take, for example, the Deputy Minister of Correctional Services, Mr. Makwetla, he should not even, in my opinion, Mr. Gavin Watson, who's the CEO of Bosasa and a massive service provider to the Department of Correctional Services, shouldn't even be able to phone Mr. Makwetla directly. It just opens Mr. Makwetla up to all sorts of questions about any sort of relationship. And now Mr. Makwetla has actually confirmed that Bosasa came to install these cameras at his house. And now he's turning around and saying, but I've begged them for the invoice. I want to pay them so many times, but they've just never come with an invoice. I just find it's an absolutely shocking explanation for the situation.
I was going to say, what do you make of those claims that he's been begging, like you say, to be charged for a very long time?
Well, from my knowledge, those cameras have been installed, and based on his own version in his statement, those cameras were installed in 2016, and from what my sources are telling me, only removed in January this year. So for about 2 years, almost 2 years and a couple of months, these things were installed at his personal house. And then I was shown SMSs where Mr. Makwetla was interacting with Bosasa employees saying, look, the system's broken. What do I do here? What do I do there? So I really don't put a lot of weight in that explanation that he's been begging for the system, for the invoices so that he could pay for the system. I mean, it's really simple. Employees from Bosasa should never have been allowed on his private property, should never have installed these things in the first place. So he's opening himself up to a whole lot of questions surrounding but why exactly do you even have a relationship with these people to begin with?
Carl, are you surprised at the names involved here, especially Vincent Smith? I mean, his persona as chair of these parliamentary committees, probing a lot of things in society, it was so righteous, I guess.
It was, and from the very beginning when I started working on the stories about Mr. Smith specifically, the reaction I got all the time was, but Smith is such a good guy. He's a really good MP. He's really outspoken against corruption. That was my personal interaction with Mr. Smith as well, leading up to the publication of the story. He really seemed to have a very keen idea of what needed to be done, what he was doing, what was going on. I think it's a case of bad judgment, really, on his part. I don't want to take away anything from what he did. I think what he did was wrong, but I think it was, in his case specifically, a bit of bad judgment, and maybe things were getting just a little bit too difficult for him, and he reached out to, unfortunately, the wrong people.
Yeah. So he claims that the payments that were received were personal loans. Does the whole loan claim make things difficult? I mean, do you have to declare loans?
You have to. It's a benefit that he receives, and he has to declare this. But I don't buy the loan story. I don't think that it's legitimate. What I've noticed is that he's the only person claiming that it was a loan, and everybody involved in the story except, Mr. Angelo Agrizzi, who's left Bosasa. He was the former chief operations officer. So Mr. Smith is saying that he approached Mr. Agrizzi as a friend for this loan and understood that the money would be coming from Mr. Agrizzi. And okay, that's all good and well, but then still you have to declare it. But I don't buy that for a second either, because if you look at the proof of payments and sort of the bank statements and everything, nowhere does it say that loan for Mr. Smith or Mr. Agrizzi paid this money to you. It's kind of obvious that the money is either coming in straight into cash. So there's an obvious attempt to hide where this money is coming from.
So this is all blowing up because Agrizzi is talking. Is there going to be more?
Well, Mr. Agrizzi did issue a statement to say that he was going to be putting some information out into the public, and since then we haven't really been able to reach him other than for comment. So at the moment what we're working on is based on what several other sources have given us. So Mr. Agrizzi will obviously have the key to the whole picture. I mean, he was there for 18 years, and he's called it a corruption and racketeering ring that went on for 18 years while he was there. So I think he really holds the key. The question is just now when and how he's actually going to disclose this information in a way that doesn't prejudice him as well, because he's implicated in a lot of this.
And, do you get the feeling he could be a disgruntled employee? That's often the case, or is this something different?
I don't think so. My gut instinct tells me that Mr. Agrizzi is wanting to come clean, and he's wanting to maybe get some things off his conscience. I'm quite sure. But it's hard to tell at this very early stage. We'll really have to wait and see and verify the veracity of the information that he does give, if he does give us anything, and then really just work on it from there, and then try and get to know the man and try and understand what his motivations are. But right now, I just really believe that it's a case of I want to get this off my shoulders. I feel bad, and I've done some things that were wrong, and so let's talk about it.
All right, so at the very least, it looks like ministers and an ANC MP receiving benefits amounting to hundreds of thousands of rand and no disclosure. Beyond that, it is hard to prove, but these things should be declared. That was City Press journalist on the case, Carl Cowan. We take a short break. We'll be back with more.